My name is James Windsor, and I'm coming to you from the Venerable Georgia Institute of Technology School of Business. I am here with you today in the hopes of identifying and possibly discovering a solution to the current crisis that plagues our world economy. There will be no clear-cut answer to our problem, and there are many schools of thought in regards of how to fix it. I am not here to advocate any particular ideology. I will leave that up to my friends. But rather, I intend to find some compromise between the two major ideologies to create the best and most efficient solution for the citizens of our world. I have assembled a group of the foremost economic thinkers alive today. The group is comprised of 4 of my colleagues, with a combined 22 Nobel Peace Prizes in economics. My friends Louis Van Holding and Margaret Hathaway will be advocating the workings of a purely free market, and Kaiser Permanente and the esteemed Jeff Jefferson, Earl of Grey, are here to argue in the favor of government regulation. Hello, Louis, Margaret.
Hello, James. How's Elizabeth?
Fantastic. I'm glad you asked. She sends her regards.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Thanks for having us here today, James.
Yes, ma'am. And as y'all can see, this side of the table is for your judging.
Thank you.
Nice to have you. Glad you're here. And now for the rest of our panel. Mr. Permanente, Jeff, how are you all doing this evening?
Fantastic, thank you.
We're doing very well.
Glad. Here, let's take our seats so we can begin our great debate. Thank you. I would like to propose a question to the group. How did we get to this point of economic virulence? Jeff?
Well, Mr. Windsor, in an attempt to properly understand the foundation of the cause, one must consider the global behavior of handling finances. In short, the monies handled by all the financial institutions comprise an aggregate supply of finances, which are in turn used for investment opportunities. This supply of money steadily increased with the passage of time until it totaled $36 trillion around the year 2000. However, the sum grew vertically to the point of 100% increase only 5 years later. It is for this very reason that the investment fever sought its treatment.
That's exactly right, Jeff. The global pool of money increased by investing in long-term, low-risk investments. A majority of this money was put into U.S. government bonds. But after 9/11, the chairman of the Federal Reserve at the time, Alan Greenspan, steadily lowered the interest rates on bonds to a record low of 1%. The pool of money was forced to look for alternatives to invest in, and it turned to mortgages.
Banks and other financial intermediaries ran out of prime mortgages, so they turned to subprime mortgages. These are riskier because most of the intermediaries didn't require the borrowers to have any assets, savings, or even a job to repay the mortgage. All of the loans that couldn't be repaid created the housing bubble.
Of course. Additionally, one of the reasons subprime mortgages were so significant a problem was because of the volatility of the housing market. Despite seeming safe for investments, the demand for housing was driven not by consumers, but by investors looking for relatively safe investments. This drove up housing prices to a point where people were unable to pay their loans, bringing the housing market crashing down, taking the economy with it.
So Louis, Margaret, what do you propose is the solution to the economic plight that is currently ailing our international society?
Well, the 25 years after Reagan was president was considered a period of free market prosperity. Recovery started a year after he became president. After 18 months, the economy grew more than 9%. Stability was the result of income tax rates cut in half, free trade, and deregulation. Until 2008, GDP grew at an average of 3.2% annually. All of this evidence supports the fact that the solution to the end of the financial crisis is to abolish government regulation and establish a free market society. It worked before, it could work again.
Precisely. People in countries with larger amounts of economic freedom, such as the United States, Canada, Australia, Hong Kong, Japan, Taiwan, the list goes on and on. These countries are far richer and have greater human rights than people with limited free markets, like Russia, Albania, China, and every country in Africa. Even if free enterprise isn't the most efficient form of human organization, it is morally superior to others because it is rooted in voluntary relationships rather than force and coercion, and it respects the individual's sanctity.
You speak of greater human rights associated with the free market. In your opinion, what is the correlation between the free market and the higher standard of living, and why is it that way?
Well, in the free market, there is a much greater opportunity to succeed in life. The entire system is based upon people working hard and earning what they have. If you choose not to work hard, you will end up with nothing. And this is the way it should be. Failure should result in consequences. The government shouldn't just bail out people when they hit rock bottom. Therefore, if everyone strives to succeed, then everyone has sufficient funds, if not a surplus. This is what allows people to have a higher standard of living in a free market system.
Indeed. Jeff, Kaiser, how would you respond? Mr. Jefferson, is there a problem?
Well, what is wrong?
I was curious about your feet on the table.
We do this back in London quite often.
Oh, I apologize. It's been ages since I've been back to the mother country. I apologize
I
for
understand.
not being up on the custom. But regardless, Kaiser, how would you respond to the question posed earlier about how to correct the current economic crisis?
Well, the problem with the free market is that it is neither self-correcting nor self-sustaining. Instead, it allows for the strongest to thrive and dominate any competition they may have. Government regulation not only prevents these largest companies from becoming monopolies, but also helps smaller companies enter and stay in the market. Government regulation can take the form of cash infusions, such as subsidies to agriculture and airlines, or even the bank bailout. It can also take the form of regulatory laws that force companies to maintain a minimum quality in their product through methods of production or both. Regulation would guide the economy to prosperity and help maintain that prosperity in the years that follow.
There's been much debate over the government investment in large companies such as AIG and General Motors. Those people fear that when the economy rights itself and becomes self-sustaining again, the government will not relinquish its shares in these large companies. How would your sphere of thought prevent this injustice from occurring in the future?
That is a very good question, James. Government regulation applies not only to its citizens, but to the government as well. The government's purpose is to serve its people, not attempt to control their lives. When the time comes that the economy has recovered, the government should no longer control companies. However, the government is in no position to save failing companies when it does not drastically affect the economy.
You both established that subprime mortgages were one of the causes of this crisis. How would each of your systems prevent this from happening in the future?
Well, James, although companies stand to make a larger profit with higher leverage, they also take
Excuse
on
me.
a much higher risk.
Could you please define leverage for us, just so that we all have a common understanding of the term? Do not get lost.
Certainly, James, for it is a term that can be easily misunderstood. Leverage, in its plainest sense, is simply a technique used to multiply profit. The most basic concept consisting primarily of using borrowed money for investment of assets that generate greater return than is owed, thus maximizing profit. This term is not to be confused with the typical borrowing that involves a consumer using borrowed money for personal goods. Since this process involves people's personal finances, banks should not be the companies to take on such a hefty risk. Banks contain a significant portion of the nation's financial capital, and the failure of multiple banks would devastate the economy, as we have seen. To help prevent this, banks would have to be below a minimum leverage threshold and would be unable to take on risky investments. Other lending institutions would be designed to take on riskier investments and can go past that leverage threshold for one simple reason. If they fail, they understood the risks that were involved and don't possibly ruin everyday people's savings accounts.
Precisely. But in order for this to be implemented, credit rating agencies would have to be held to stricter standards.
Excuse me. I do not mean to interrupt, but what role exactly did these credit agencies play in the whole scheme of things?
Well, credit rating agencies were responsible for determining the relative safety of an investment. A AAA rating meant that the investment was basically guaranteed to make a profit. However, these agencies were rating risky investments, ones that previously banks would not have even looked at as relatively safe investments, sometimes even AAA. Oftentimes, the banks would pay these agencies to falsify their ratings in order to appease investors and allow the banks to take on these risks. Running these agencies would have to be nonprofit, perhaps even government-run, and held to consistent standards. One of the problems in the crisis was that banks were taking on investments that were believed to be safe, but in reality had a very good chance to fail. With standards set in place, credit rating agencies would be able to perform their duties more effectively. The result is safer banks for everybody.